not do it. And do they have to? Can you figure out a way essentially to get out of mitzvah? So we have the sources here. I hope you can see them, and you could be able to know what we're doing and what we're looking at. And if you're on Instagram or another platform that doesn't have the sources, so you can go look at them later. But here we go. So we're going to look at four essential sugyas, four essential topics in the Talmud that are going to be our introduction and understand where we get this question from. And hopefully the question is a little vague in terms of if a person's obligated to do mitzvahs, who are obligated to do mitzvahs, but there are certain times where we can get out of doing a mitzvah, and that's going to be the question of, can you use essentially the letter of the law to get out of the mitzvah, or do you have to put yourself into a situation where you are doing the mitzvah? Okay, so that's our question here. Okay, so let's look at the sources here. Let's look at the first sugya, and the first sugya comes from a Gemara in Brachos, and it says, Amar Rabba bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Elai Borei Shelo Kedoros Harishonim Doros Hachronim. So the earlier generations or these generations are not like the earlier generations. Okay, so Doros Harishonim, excuse me, Hayu Machnisim Peroseim Derech Tarksimo. Okay, so in order to, we have an obligation to take like tithes from the fruits, trumos and maasros, from fruits from our fields or from our yards, our gardens, wherever we have our fruits. But in order to be obligated in tithing in trumos and maasros, so a person has to bring them through essentially through their front door. If they bring them into the house through a back door or they leave them outside, then they're not obligated to give trumos and maasros on them. That's the gifts that we give to a kohen, and they can essentially keep they can eat the fruits and get benefits from the food without taking trumos and maasros from them. So the Gemara compares, and this is Rabbi Uri comparing the earlier generations, right, who used to make sure to bring their fruits in through the front, and as opposed to the later generations. What would they do? Doros Achronim machnisim perasem derech gagos derech hatzeros derech karpipios kidei lepatra mina meiser. They would bring it in through a different entranceway, and that would exempt them from trumos and maasros. Right, because you're not obligated to give meiser until it comes through the front of the house. Okay, so that's our first sugya, and our question is, without delving really into the details of trumos and maasros, the Gemara's issue here seems to be getting out of a mitzvah by bringing your fruits through a different entrance. And it seems to be complementing the earlier generations, because they would make sure to bring their fruits in a way where they would take a loss and they would give trumos and maasros, as opposed to the later generations, which wouldn't do that. They would get out of it. So the question being, are you able to get out of mitzvos? Okay, that's the question: is getting out of a mitzvah a problem? Okay, so that's our first question, and based on our first sugya. Okay, the second example is a little more complicated, and the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, "Malcha eshkechei l'rav katina de machise sedina. Amar le katina sedina b'kache v'sarbala b'sisa tzitzis shel tcheles mate aleh amar le'an shisu aseh amar le b'zmantika ritzcha anshin." So an angel came to Rav Katina, and he said that if you wear a linen cloak in the like a jacket made out of linen, or a garment made out of linen in the summer, and a coat that only has, let's say, 2 corners to it, so then you're obligated from tzitzis. You're never going to fulfill the mitzvah. In other words, you can essentially never be obligated in tzitzis. When are you obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis? When you wear a 4-cornered garment. So if you're wearing a 4-cornered garment, then you're obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis. So, but if it's possible that you never wear a 4-cornered garment, or you wear a different type of garment in the winter or the summer that is not obligated in tzitzis, and the angel is criticizing Rav Katina for doing this, for not fulfilling the mitzvah, in the way that he's supposed to for not fulfilling the mitzvah tzitzis. He's not wearing tzitzis. He's getting out of it by the letter of the law. So if Katina answered him, what, you're going to punish, right, for you punish me for not doing a mitzvah? Aren't you going to say? In other words, his answer is, well, I'm not obligated in the mitzvah. The mitzvah is only obligatory once I wear a specific type of garment. But I'm not wearing that type of garment. So why are you assuming that I'm going to get punished? I'm not obligated. So the angel said to him that it's true, right? You're right. You're not going to get punished, but there's a time of divine anger and punishment. It's a more philosophical, kind of idea that we're not going to get into now. And at those times, a person even gets punished for not fulfilling a mitzvah that they weren't obligated in. In other words, that they tried to get out of. Okay. Now, this brings us to a second question. And the second question we have is, it's a strange idea because we know that there are mitzvahs that we have to fulfill, right? There are mitzvahs that we're obligated to fulfill. Let's say an easy one is a kiddush on Friday night. We know we have to say kiddush on Friday night, okay? So and we should be punished for neglecting those mitzvahs, right? If we don't do a mitzvah that we're obligated to do, so for sure we should be punished for that. So what is Rav Katina referring to in the Gemara about never wearing tzitzis? Right, so if a person never wears tzitzis, so then he should just say, "I'm not obligated in tzitzis." So what's really the lesson of this Gemara that the Gemara is trying to bring out? Okay, let's look at the third source here. This is a Rush, and the Rush says like this. So he says, "Yiri Shemayim Yachmer Shlo Yachol Pachos B'Kishir L'Istalek V'Nasafek." So we know that when we eat. After we eat, we're obligated to make a bracha achrona. We're obligated to make another bracha, and a bracha afterwards. So if we have bread, so then we know we have a doraisa Torah obligation to say a bracha samazon. But on the mitzvahs on brachos derabanan, let's say a bracha main shosh, like a al michil, let's say. So I have to eat a certain amount of food. If I don't eat a certain amount of food, I don't have to make a bracha achrona. So I could, let's say, in order to make a bracha achrona, for argument's sake, I have to eat 3 cookies. Okay, so if I eat 2 cookies, so then I'm not obligated in a bracha achrona. Okay, so I'm going to eat 2 cookies in order that I don't have to make a bracha achrona. So the question is that acceptable? So the Rush seems to validate that attitude of saying I'm going to eat less than the measurement required. But he says that Yira Shemayim, which is somebody that fears God, somebody that's on a different level, so that person will be machmir, will be stringent upon himself, that even though he's not obligated to do this, he's going to eat less than the measurement required, pachos mikashir, in order to get out of the doubt of whether or not he's obligated to make a bracha. Okay? So if we're saying that a Yira Shemayim will be stringent upon themselves, it would seem to say that there's a problem with doing this. It's not ideal. So our question is, what's the problem? Right? What's the problem with eating less than a shear of food? Right? Because you have to eat a shear of food. Okay, so you eat a shear of food, but if I don't have to, so then what's the problem if I don't? Right? Okay, so what's his issue? Okay, so that's his question. Okay, that's my question, my third question. Okay, fourth sugya we're going to look at is Gemara in Sota. The Gemara in Sota says as follows: "This is the Darash Rav Simlai. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu desperately wanted to come into the land of Israel. Okay, Moshe Rabbeinu really was it all about the fruits of Eretz Yisrael? He wanted to have a Bereshit apple. That's what he was looking for. Right? So he says, L'sova mitova l'tzarecha, or is it to be satisfied from the goodness of the land? Is that what this is all about? Kachamar Moshe, but this is what Moshe said. Harbe mitzvos nitstavu Yisrael, ve'niskayim Eretz Yisrael. We know that there's a lot of mitzvos that are dependent on the land. Shmita, for instance, Mikla, that these mitzvos are dependent on being in Eretz Yisrael. You can't fulfill these mitzvos outside of Eretz Yisrael. So, so Moshe Rabbeinu says that I want to come into Eretz Yisrael so I can do those mitzvos. If I don't come into Eretz Yisrael, I won't be able to do the mitzvos. So our question here is Moshe wanting to fulfill the mitzvos, is that something instructive for Jews later on? In other words, if a Jew says, I'm going to live outside of Israel for my whole life, and I don't have to do mitzvos. So is that an improper attitude to have? Right? Again, we're not talking about the question of a person should live in Israel or not. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking simply about limiting the question to if a person takes the attitude of I'm going to live in Chutz La'aretz in order to get out of doing mitzvos, is that something that is that's problematic? Is that a problematic attitude? Because you can say, of course, on a philosophical level, that's wrong because a person shouldn't try to get out of mitzvahs. But on a purely legal basis, a person is not obligated to keep shmita unless they live in Israel. A person is not obligated, we'll see, to put up a mezuzah unless they live in a house. If a person lives on a boat in his whole life, are they actually doing something wrong? Is that a problem? So that's our fourth question. So before we go on, just to understand, we looked at four different sugyas in the Gemara, the four different areas, and the four areas highlighted an attitude of trying to get out of the mitzvah. And our question is, again, we're not looking at this philosophically, looking at this legally. Is this an issue? So we have the Gemara Brachos that talked about bringing Trumas and Maasros in through a different entrance, so that you would not have to give Trumas and Maasros. Is that a proper attitude? We looked at the Gemara in Menachos about wearing tzitzis, that a person could just never put on a four-cornered garment in their life, and that way they won't have to wear tzitzis. And we looked at the rush was the third topic. If a person eats less than the amount required in order to get out of making a bracha achrona, is that a problem? And the last thing we looked at was Moshe Rabbeinu's desire to go into Eretz Yisrael in order to fulfill the mitzvos. Is that something that we should be trying to do, that on a legal basis, that we should try to be putting ourselves in situations like this, that we're obligated to do more mitzvos? Or can a person say, well, if I go to Israel, I'm going to be obligated in Shemitah and Trumas and Maasros on the D'oraisa level, on all these different mitzvos that I'm not obligated in Chutz La'aretz. So maybe it's best that I don't go to Israel, so I don't have to do those mitzvahs. Right? That's the questions. Those are the four areas that we looked at, and we had questions on each of those areas. Okay, so let's move on here. We're going to look at a Meiri. This is in source number 5, and the Meiri is going to talk. He's going to say something that's interesting. He's going to declare one of the Gemaras that we looked at, and he's going to use the word of Isser, of forbidden. And it did not seem that way from the Gemara, and we're going to see that people disagree with him. So the Meiri says as follows. He says, Zarch Sheteda, She'asel Harim, Ulachnis L'derech Gagos or Karpios, Kidei Lipater Min HaMaiser, Arderech Shebiarnu, Hachnasa B'mot Shela, Ela, Shemikol Makom Im Asek Rein Lo Nischayim Adayim B'Maiser Kol Shebiarnu. So the Meiri says that, yes, it's true. If you bring in Trumas and Maasros through the window, and you don't bring it in through the front door, so then you're not obligated to take Trumas and Maasros. But says the Meiri, it's forbidden to do this. Now the Gemara never used the lashon, never used the language of Isser. The Gemara never said that this is forbidden. The Gemara simply said that a person should not. It was great. The earlier generations were greater because they went ahead and they went ahead and made sure to obligate themselves in Trumas and Maasros. While the latter generations didn't do that. The latter generations they made sure to obligate themselves in Trumas and Maasros. So those were the way the Gemara looked at it. And the Gemara simply was just critical of the later generations, but it didn't say that what they did was forbidden. The Meiri here says that it's forbidden to pull this sort of trick to get out of Trumas and Maasros. The Meiri is saying that you have to obligate yourself in Trumas and Maasros by bringing it through the front door, and it's usher to do something. So my question here on the Meiri is, what's the nature of this prohibition of getting out of Trumas and Maasros, and by extension to other mitzvahs in the Torah as well, which would seem to be, according to Meiri, that would also be usher? I don't understand. Where's this prohibition? What's the nature of this prohibition? There's no prohibition, if you look through the Torah, of doing something like this. That prohibition does not exist. So where does this come from? Where are we finding this prohibition? Okay, now in contradistinction to the Meiri, the Rambam is going to say the exact opposite. The Rambam says as follows. He says, "Mutar l'harim al hatvua l'achnisa b'motz k'dei shetieh behem ta'achelas u'ptura min ha'maiser." V'zor ma'at ach shechnis l'veiso pater li'olam min ha'truma ha'maiser she'eino master l'gmarko. Okay, so the Rambam says again, it directly against Meiri, and this is so interesting because it's usually the Meiri follows the Rambam, and here right, the Rambam preceded the Meiri, and usually the Meiri is along the lines of the same way of thinking about sugyas as the Rambam. So very interesting that they have two different ways of looking at this. The Rambam says this idea of getting out of Trumas and Maishos by bringing the fruits and vegetables through a side entrance or a back entrance and through a window and not through the front door. So the Meiri says the Rambam says that's mutter. It says mutter l'arim. He doesn't even say it's a b'diavad. He doesn't say, he just says it's mutter. You could do this. That's it's possible. While the Meiri used the language of usher, right? So that's very odd. So our question here is, what's the debate between the Rambam and the Meiri over whether it's permissible to get out of taking Trumas and Maestros by bringing it through the window? Okay, that's our question. What's the machlokas here? How do we understand? Okay, going on here, the Rambam says, we're in source number 7 here. The Rambam says that asur l'adam la'asos isaso pachos pachos mikashir k'dei lefatcher min hachala. We know that when we make challah, when we're dealing with dough, if we've made a certain amount of dough, we now have to take what's called challah to separate a certain amount of the dough. Back in the good old days, we give it to the Kohen. Today, we can't give it to the Kohen, we don't know, so we burn it. But we set aside a certain amount. Okay, now, but in order to be obligated to set aside that certain amount, you have to have made enough dough to be obligated in it, right? It's only a certain amount of dough makes somebody obligated in taking challah and giving challah to the Kohen, separating challah. And again, separating that dough and giving it to the Kohen, or today burning it, it comes at a loss because you could be eating that dough or you could be selling that dough. So there's a loss involved here. So what the easy way to get out of the loss is by making a small enough amount of challah or dough that a person doesn't have to separate challah. Okay, so then I'm exempt. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm exempt from it, right? So that seems to be what a good way of getting out of doing it. But the Rambam here says that that's usher. A person cannot make a small amount of dough in order to not have to take challah. Okay, so our question now, obviously, is the same way we asked on the Meiri. We're asking the Rambam here. What's the Rambam's problem with making less than a shiur of challah? Right? Why can't I do that? I'm only obligated to challah once I make a shiur of challah. So why is the Rambam saying it's usher to make, on purpose, I'm going to set out to make a small enough amount of dough that I don't have to make challah? Now, a second question we have is, this seems to be a contradiction, right? This Rambam seems to be contradicting himself, because when it came to Trumas and Maestros, the Rambam had no problem with taking the fruit into the house in such a way that he would be exempt from doing the mitzvah, right? That from having to do Trumas and Maestros. So that would seem to be easy enough for him to do so, right? And that the Rambam says there's no problem with doing that. He says mutter. But now, right? What do we see now? Now we're watching as the Rambam says that it's usher to do that when it comes to taking challah, right? So how is it that it's permissible to try to get out of the mitzvah when it comes to Trumas and Maestros? Where a person could bring, according to Rambam, it's perfectly mutter to bring the fruit into the house in a side entrance to get out of Trumas and Maestros. Okay, while according to but when it comes to challah, the Rambam says that it's forbidden to try to get out of the mitzvah of challah by giving less, right? So that would seem to be a direct contradiction in the Rambam when we look at the difference between Trumas and Maestros and challah, whether or not a person can get out of the mitzvah by doing it in a way where the person is never obligated to do the mitzvah. So when it comes to Trumas and Maestros, the Rambam says it's mutter. When it comes to challah, the Rambam says it's forbidden and a person can't do it. the question is, what's the difference between the two of them? That one it would seem to be permissible, and one it would seem to be forbidden. Okay. Okay, so let's move on here. And let's look at a rush. Okay, that the rush is going to talk about a person that doesn't have a person's garment it doesn't have four corners on it. Okay, and then the person is not obligated to tzitzis. In order to be obligated in the mitzvah tzitzis, a person has to have a garment with four corners on it. Okay, so look at the rush. The rush says like this. It says "Avalinda she'ein ragil milbosh beged sheish bo dal kakos." So today, nowadays, and this is just as true of the rush's time as it is today, we don't wear garments with four corners on them. Right, our garments are rounded off. That's just not the style. And people don't wear garments with just with four corners. So now the law Amar Torah ela gedilim tasalecha arba kanfos suseska asher techasaba. Okay, so and the Torah only says that you have to put tzitzis onto a garment that has four corners to it, and that covers it up. So im yesh b'kuseska dal kanfos aselo gedilim lo chayvaso Torah b'kach talos vas dal kanfos lasos gedilim. Right, so he says the Torah obligates you to put tzitzis on a garment with four corners, but it never says that you're obligated to go out and buy a garment with four corners. So if I never buy a garment with four corners, right? If I don't buy a garment with four corners, so then I'm not obligated to put tzitzis on it. So okay, so he says, so there says the Rush. But really, a person should try to do all mitzvos. Right? Where does he get this from? From that fourth introductory Gemara that we had seen in Sota, where it says, Ella, it says, Moshe Rabbeinu, Shalaya Ta'aya B'Kalis L'Eretz Yisrael, Lecho Mipriya, Ella Kedei L'Chayim Mitzvos Atzuyos B'Aretz. Okay, so he says that we learn this from Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to come into Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because he wanted to fulfill the mitzvos. So if that's his aim is to fulfill the mitzvos. So that's what. That's what we should do. So he says, as the Rosh Kol Sheked, mitzvah tzitzis, and all the more so, not just mitzvahs that are dependent on the land, not mitzvahs Atzuyos B'Aretz, but the mitzvah tzitzis, right? All the more so the mitzvah tzitzis, shehi l'schiras kol mitzvos. So mitzvah tzitzis a person should for sure want to fulfill, because that's a mitzvah that reminds us to do all the other mitzvahs. That's the purpose of tzitzis. So for sure you should try your very best to put on a four-corner garment. Okay. So now my question is, when the Rush wrote that a person should learn from Moshe and try and fulfill as many mitzvahs as possible, especially tzitzis, is he teaching halacha? Is this a Mussar lesson? What's the Rush trying to do? Okay, now Rabbi Yonah, okay, he's going to take a similar approach. Rabbi Yonah says like this: that a person is obligated. He's going to disagree with the Rush. Say a person is obligated to buy a tzitzis garment. He says like this: "In ein lo beged kazeh ein chayav l'chnosa." He says it seems to be that if you don't have a garment with four corners on it, so then you're not chayav to buy it. You're not obligated to buy that garment. Afghan Zosam Robson is the Chrono Rahaki Energy and Nation tells with Sarah, Al Davar Sherlo Hamad Bilvo, Yafa Mitzvah Svara. Bavur Sibev Pnei Davar Chiyuba, Allah Vakachas La Begeshish Lava Kantos, Lasos Bosses The Gemara talks about the punishment that one receives from trying to get out of the mitzvahs, and therefore it seems that a person should, as best as possible, buy a garment with four corners and put on a special garment, since this, even though in their regular dress they're not obligated to do this. And he says that a person should know that a Yiras Hashem should be stringent and very meticulous upon themselves. He says both meticulous and stringent, and that way he should fulfill even the mitzvahs that he considers kalot. You see the easy mitzvahs or mitzvahs that are not as significant and as serious. Just like he does on mitzvahs that he does consider very stringent. Ki lo yavinu la'asher hamitzvah azos kala lumos hachumas. Ach yavinu l'gdolos hamatzir ala yisbarach. Right? Because we don't know how much a mitzvah is worth. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do the mitzvah. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do the mitzvah, then we should do the mitzvahs. Upikach hanecha heitev liros ki ha'ikar hanichbar hazeh nizbar b'Torah ki nichtav ha'mitzvos hakiba b'nei ha'seva kamo shenichtav ha'mitzvos b'Rabivima v'shmir Shabbos ani Hashem. Right. So we said a person should be very careful about doing these mitzvahs. So when Rabbeinu Yonah writes that a person is obligated to buy his garment, is this he's saying this is as a chiyuv? He's saying that a person really has this obligation to do such a thing. That's very interesting. Right, that's very interesting. Okay, so what we saw today was in our first part of this year, we saw our 4 different sugyas, 4 different topics that go through where it seems to be people are trying to get out of mitzvos, whether it was trumas and mitzvos or tzitzis or bracha achrona, right? So and we juxtapose those with the attitude that Moshe Rabbeinu showed when it came to Eretz Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu seems to say that he wants to go into Eretz Yisrael in order to do the mitzvahs. That seems to be, at least the way the Rush looks at it, that obligates us that even when we can get out of the mitzvah, to put ourselves in a situation where we're obligated to do the mitzvah. Okay, that seems to be the what's happening. So those are our first questions and our first topics we're going to get. Next time, Bleeder, we'll start with Tosfos. A lot of interesting Tosfos in here, and I'll mark this Tosfos off, and that's it for today. Thanks for watching and joining and learning. All the best.